Good morning, our folks. The boys will love that. Good morning, our folks. And we're glad everybody's here. I told Becky we were getting ready this morning. I said, this feels like a big day. She said, yeah. I said, I can't believe we used to do this every Sunday. We didn't realize in the early days how good we had it. We had every Sunday morning, 6, 8, 10, 12 from the campground, and we were eating dinner every Sunday. It seems like a lifetime ago, doesn't it, Melinda? But, hey, man, yeah, this is awesome. This is awesome. There's the birthday boy. Y'all be sure and tell Dylan happy belated birthday. And Sister Carolyn, yeah. Well, she might not want to be reminded. Dylan doesn't mind yet. What's one more, right? Well, we're glad everybody's here. We really are. We are going to go into prayer. We're in the book of Acts in the 21st chapter is where we'll be today, and going into the 22nd. We do have some folks we need to pray for. We've got, Sister Nancy told us Wednesday night, the Beecham family, Brother Harry Beecham lost a granddaughter this week, and we need to pray for her. And Ella Jean Rollins just called Anita, and she lost a granddaughter. We don't know the details of timing, if it was yesterday or sounds like Aunt Ella Jean just found out this morning. 38 years old, lives in Florida. That's family to me and Brian, and Ella Jean's precious. We're so thankful for her and Brother Vernon, his testimony before he passed away, a long time before he passed away. We were there in Greensboro in 2006 when they went to the altar. And wow, that was a meeting. Man, that was a meeting. So we're thankful for their testimony, but let's be in prayer for them. That hurts when you lose a grandchild. I can't imagine. Can't imagine that pain. We also today in Belvedere, North Carolina, which is about an hour out of Norfolk, they'll be having the funeral for Brother John Pippin. Brother John went to the altar. I talked to Aunt Martha Mustin last night. We're pretty sure it was I think it was 2010 at the very first, we think, we were trying to figure the year, but we think it was the first year that they had Easter meeting in the new Chesapeake sanctuary. And Brother John was, he was under conviction. Oh, man. And he passed away this week at age 88. He has 5 children, 19 grandchildren, 10 great-grandchildren. And Brother Tim Temples and Brother Gene Mustin are preaching the funeral today. Let's be in prayer for that. It's at 3 o'clock today in Belvedere. So a lot of sorrow to be praying about. And we'll be thankful that, at some point, death crosses us personally, but this morning we're praying for other people, and that's something to be thankful for too. Where's the mic at? You got it, Brian? All right, let's go into prayer. Brother Jonathan, would you grab that mic and would you lead us in prayer, please?
Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you humbly this morning and thank you so much for allowing us to gather together and to worship you. We ask you to look over this service and be with everyone here. We ask you to be with those who couldn't be here today. We ask you to be with those who have lost loved ones. We know how hard it is. We know how painful it is. We ask you to just wrap your arms around them and keep them in the palm of your hand. And we ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
And I told Brother Jonathan this morning, his grandparents would be so proud that he's, not only that he's sanctified, of course, that's the biggest thing, but I know your granddad would be loving you're in Leesburg. He loved being here. I miss that guy. Man, I miss Brother Marvin. He brought a spark, man. He was Marvin. Warts and all, loud clothes and all, personality and all, but man, he was on fire. Thank the Lord for his testimony. 21st chapter of Acts. We've been going through Acts for some months now, but Brian, I felt better about that when I read on the pastor's page this week. The guy was asking, how long do y'all think it should take to go through a book? And they are studying the book of John, and they are at like the 12th chapter, and they've been in it 2.5 years. Now that's called just getting all the juice out. that rag has got to be dry. You don't have to hang it up to get the last 10%. I think they got it. So I felt a little better about, we've been in this maybe, I don't know, you started it. It's been a while. We've been in it a while. Anyway, 21st chapter of Acts. We were talking last week, first part of this chapter, there's, we covered a good thing where basically Paul is on his way. Now he's in Jerusalem. He's landed there as we start reading. We're going to start reading in the 27th verse. He's landed at Jerusalem. It said in verse 17, when we were come to Jerusalem, the brethren received us gladly. He'd been on this mission to go. His goal was to be in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost. And we had a big discussion last week. I wish Sister Nancy's here. I know she's in the back probably, but we were talking about Paul, and I want to read, I'm backing up for those that were here, because I said I could not find where the Spirit told him to go, but I found it this week. I just not read it far enough. But he said in the 17th chapter, I think it is, he said, and behold, no, it was in the 20th chapter and I go bound in the Spirit to Jerusalem. I had overlooked that verse last week because he had people, though, that said in the Spirit, do not go to Jerusalem. Right. And he was going anyway. And we had a big discussion about that last week. Wow, it takes a lot of courage, but he felt like he had a calling to go. So now he's here, and in this passage right before this 27th, some of the Jewish brothers had decided that the word had gotten out that to the fervent Jewish sanctified believers, they were sanctified and yet they were zealous of the law. And I want to give some understanding to that. I think that for those of us older, and as I told someone this week, pretty much anybody I meet now, there's a really 3 out of 4 chance they're going to be younger than me. Kind of hurts my feelings, but that's the way it is. When we've been, for those of us that were raised in our church, if someone come along and wanted to basically say some of the traditions and customs we're used to are no longer needed, it would be a tough adjustment. It'd be a really tough adjustment. So I want to give some allowance to these Jewish people that were raised with the Jewish faith and give them credit that they agreed and became convicted that they needed the Holy Spirit. That's amazing in and of itself, because they were like the Jews told Jesus, we're of Abraham's seed. Right. We've never been in bondage to any man. Right. I mean, they felt like they were born into it, you know? And it's almost like we had years and years and years ago, there was a small faction of our church. They were down in Florida, and they decided that if a husband and wife was sanctified, that the children they had were born sanctified. And I don't know the details. My grandmother told me a little bit about that, and your dad knew about it, and a lot of the historians knew about it. I don't know how long that theory was around, but I would guess it was probably around for about 13 years. So those kids became teenagers. Probably the theory kind of had holes in it after that. I'm just guessing. But they use the verse. See, you can always take a verse out of context to prove anything. Uncle Joseph used as an example. He said, I can tell you that the Bible says it's okay to steal. Because the Bible says, let him that stole, steal. The Bible says that. Do you know that, Jonathan? Yeah. Let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor working with his hands. You can take anything out of context. They use the verse, if the root is holy, then the lump will be holy. But it was out of context. So these Jewish people had believed that they should be sanctified, but they still held on to circumcision and some other traditions. And they had heard that Paul the Apostle, and it was true, he was telling Gentile believers, you don't have to be circumcised. And that threatened them because that was culture. That was what they had learned for a lifetime. So they let Paul, they took, I think it was 5 men or 7 men, I forget how many it was. It's in here. And they went and shaved their heads, which was a sign of purity. And Paul went with them for a week, I think it was. And in the 26th verse, then Paul took the men, and the next day, purifying himself with them, entered into the temple to signify the accomplishment of the days of purification, until that an offering should be offered for every one of them. Basically, it was a public statement that this guy was with them, you know, in the faith. So they did this, the brethren went to him not as a, they were not doing this like to fool anybody. It was to give Paul's testimony credence, to give it weight where it would be valued. If somebody testifies and you know they're a hypocrite, you don't listen to their testimony, no matter who it is. I mean, if we know that, we have knowledge, we know they're a hypocrite, you don't want to listen to their testimony. Well, that was kind of where this was, that he's over here telling people you got to be sanctified, but you don't have to be circumcised. And that was like, whoa. But anyway, so now he's getting ready to preach. Microphone went to Jonathan. Brian's, how's the mic always go back to you? We'll give it to Brother Jonathan. And we do use the mic here for those that haven't been here for the webcast folks. Brother Jonathan, Acts chapter 21, verse 27. And let's read down through verse 30. We'll start in. I need you guys' help. I need input. I need discussion. I'm telling you that up front. You're not interrupting me. Raise your hand. Speak out, please.
And when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews which were of Asia, when they saw him in the temple, stirred up all the people and laid hands on him, crying out, Men of Israel, help. This is the man that teacheth all men everywhere against the people and the law. And this place, and further brought Greeks also into the temple, and hath polluted this holy place. For they had seen before with him in the city Trophimus, an Ephesian, whom they supposed that Paul had brought into the temple.
Which he had not. He had not. I'm just throwing that in there. Keep going.
And all the city was moved, and the people ran together. And they took Paul and drew him out of the temple, and forthwith the doors were shut.
So at that moment in time, the Jews thought, some of them, the zealous ones thought, we got this taken care of. We got him out of the temple, doors shut. Case closed. We're done. You want to read, or we can pass it to Sister Anita? All right, Sister Anita, if you'll pick up in verse 31.
And as they went about to kill him, tidings came unto the chief captain of the band that all Jerusalem was in an uproar, who immediately took soldiers and centurions and ran down unto them. And when they saw the chief captain and the soldiers, they left beating Paul.
Okay, let's stop right there for a second. They left beating Paul. They were wailing on this dude. I mean, we can't relate to this. The worst thing that happens if we've been preaching to somebody, or testifying to somebody and they don't want to hear us, they just shut us off. I mean, has anybody ever been hit, physically hit because of the gospel here? No, we can't relate to this. They're wailing on the dude. And so now the chief captain, he was just keeping the peace like a police officer. He had no dog in the fight about the religious part of this. He just wanted Jerusalem to be peaceful. That's why he come running with the soldiers. It wasn't that he was into the philosophical part of it. Brother Glenn?
Make a comment real
Verse
quick.
33.
Okay, make a comment real quick. Paul was used to being beaten. I read this week and it almost made me sick. This is in 2 Corinthians. You mind if I read this?
No, go right ahead.
He said, of the Jews, 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one. I believe that's the 39 stripes.
Yes.
Thrice was I beaten with rods. Once was I stoned. Thrice I suffered shipwreck. A night and day I have been in the deep. And he goes on about his journeyings and his perils and robberies, and perils of sea and weariness, painfulness, watchings often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness. I said, you know what? I'm a wimpy Christian. This guy took a beating for the gospel. He really did. It was amazing what he took, you know.
Well, what was explain the 39 stripes? What, and was that 6 times or something? However many times?
I think it was 5 times
5
he had
times,
that.
whatever. What was the significance of that? 39 stripes.
Jesus took the Roman scourge. I don't know if he took the Roman scourge, because the Roman scourge would incapacitate you. It could ruin you for life and often kill people. Took their life, but he took, I don't know if this was Jewish beatings. I don't know. I mean, I can't tell, but only the power of God. They left him one time, thought he was dead. Threw enough rocks at him, they thought he was dead. But he got up.
That's right.
You know, I mean, God just kept this guy going.
I'm no history expert, but I've read that they considered 40 stripes would kill a man. So they were kind. They would only hit you 39 times, which left you, I assume, that close to death. But they was, you know. So that was the significance,
How do you
I
take
think, is that
5 beatings? I
we're
mean,
going to get you 39 times. We love you enough. We're not going to hit you that last time. You're right
We'll
there.
see if you're gonna live.
Right there at death's door. And he did that 5 times.
Oh, man.
Wow.
Can't imagine.
Yeah, we're wimps.
I really felt bad. I'm reading the Corinthians. I said, I just can't imagine taking all that. You know, just that much abuse.
Well, we were talking last week, one significance of Paul that has stood out to me in the last few weeks studying this. The only person that I know of in our church that even closely resembles Paul's example was Brother Luke Gray. We talked about this last Sunday, where Peter had a wife. Peter was married. Many of the apostles were married. We have no record of Paul having a woman in his life and being sold out 100%. He would stop at times and work for a living to pay his own way. He received money from the churches, but he did not spend that on himself. He took that money back to Jerusalem and to put in the general treasury for that money to feed, you know, the churches and their ministry, whatever. And Uncle Luke Gray's the only man that I can think of that, and I barely knew him. I was 16 when he passed, when he died in 1976. But his wife died when Brother Luke was like 36, 37, 38. I stood at his tombstone one time and did the math. He was late 30s. And he had 2 children, Tom, is that right? So I don't know how long they were with him after that, but once those children were gone, I knew Sister Evelyn, of course. I don't know the other one, but when they left, he was gone the rest of his life, another 45 years, like Paul the Apostle. Just dedicate, just preaching, wherever he was. One story I heard, there's 100 Uncle Luke stories, but Paul Arsenault, Brother Paul, went to a gospel concert years ago. He was a young man, and lights was dim, and somebody got happy and got up out of their seat and went up, up, and he says, "Man, that looks like Uncle Luke," and it was. That's a great story. All right, Brother Glenn, back to you.
All right. Verse 33.
Acts chapter 31 and verse 33.
Then the chief captain came near and took him and commanded him to be bound with 2 chains and demanded who he was and what he had done.
See, because he didn't know.
Yeah.
He's just a police officer.
Yep. And some cried one thing, some another among the multitude. And when he could not know the certainty for the tumult, he commanded him to be carried into the castle. And when he came upon the stairs, so it was that he was born of the soldiers for the violence of the people. For the multitude of the people followed after, crying, "Away with him."
Just finish out the chapter if you would.
Okay. And as Paul was to be led into the castle, he said unto the chief captain, "May I speak unto thee?" Who said, Canst thou speak Greek? Art not thou that Egyptian, which before these days madest an uproar, and leddest out into the wilderness 4,000 men that were murderers? But Paul said, I am a man which am a Jew of Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, a citizen of no mean city, and I beseech thee, suffer me to speak unto the people. And when he had given him license, Paul stood on the stairs and beckoned with the hand unto the people. And when there was made a great silence, he spake unto them in the Hebrew tongue, saying.
Now, this is not the first time that Paul had ever spoken to a multitude. I went back this week and read in the 13th chapter of Acts when he spoke to Jewish believers, and we've had sermons at Camp Meeting preached on that 13th chapter. Brother Ben Jernigan preached a great sermon on that one year at Camp Meeting. Brother Thomas Mustin did as well. And so Paul was used to speaking to crowds. Now, having said that, Brother Paul said this about himself. I can find it in my Bible here. 2 Corinthians 10th chapter, I think it is. Yeah, here it is. He said in the 10th chapter of 2 Corinthians, talking about his own self, the 8th verse, for though I should boast somewhat of our authority, which the Lord hath given us for edification, I should not be ashamed that I may not seem as if I would terrify you by letter or frighten you or scare you. And this is what they said about Paul. For his letters, they say, are weighty, powerful words. But his bodily presence is weak, and his speech contemptible. He was a horrible orator. He was not, there's some people that get up and we're spellbound. They can just, boom, boom, the words come out. It's a gift, and we thank God for those. And Paul was not, he wasn't writing. He was a poet in writing. He could put it together here. That's why he got so much of the New Testament is attributed to him. But here he's getting ready to give a speech. Now remember, we read a few weeks ago where he preached all night long, and about midnight, a young man got bored because Paul was not exciting, and he fell asleep, was in the window in the third loft, fell out and died. Paul actually killed somebody with his preaching. I'd say, now it was midnight, guy might have worked, might not have been Paul's preaching, but based on what he said about himself, his speech is contemptible. He was not an exciting guy. His bodily presence was weak. I don't think he was a big man. I'm just guessing that he was just diminutive in stature and not real big and maybe not a strong voice. But here he's getting ready to speak to a crowd that wants to kill him. Sister Faye, if you'll start reading in 22nd chapter of Acts in the first verse.
Men, brethren, and fathers, hear ye my defense, which I make now unto you. Go on down.
Yes, ma'am, keep going.
And when they heard that he spake in the Hebrew tongue to them, they kept the more silence. And he said, I am verily a man which am a Jew, born in Tarsus, a city in Sicily, yet brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, and taught according to the perfect manner of the law of the fathers, and was zealous toward God, as ye all are this day.
One more verse.
And I was persecuted this way unto the death, binding and delivering into prisons both men and women.
Read one more verse. I'm sorry, that'll be the end.
As also the high priest doth bear me witness, and all the estate of the elders, from whom also I received letters unto the brethren, and went to Damascus to bring them which were there bound unto Jerusalem for to be punished.
So what he's doing here is giving his credentials. He's wanting to verify who he is, where he come from, what he's done, kind of what his heart is. Kind of wants you to know about him before he says what he really wants to say. He was brought up in this city. He was letting them know, I wasn't born in Jerusalem, but I have connections here just like you do. He's trying to establish his credentials. He was taught according to the perfect manner of the law of the fathers. He was establishing that I know this as good as you guys do. I know your traditions. I know your customs. I'm one of you. Trying to, I won't go into that. And then he said, I was zealous toward God as ye all are this day. I'm one of you. He's connecting, making that connection. And now he's further burnishing, I persecuted this way. And boy, he did. Wow. It said in one place that he hailed, H-A-L-E-D, hailed men and women into prison. And when he was on his way to Damascus, when God struck him down, he was not going to Damascus in peace. The Christians there, I don't know if they had advance notice that he was coming. Now, they could check Facebook and find out. You know, nobody could do a cell phone. I don't know if they had advance notice, but he was coming, and he would have come in this door and arrested everybody in this room. And we all would have gone to prison. Now, imagine that. We can't imagine it, I don't think. You think, Anita?
No. In Galatians, he said, I persecuted the church of God and wasted
Wasted it. I mean, imagine, and I can't imagine, but if we had to meet under that threat, wow. We had to stop meeting 3 years ago for 20 weeks. And some folks got in the habit of staying at home. And they hadn't got out of that habit yet. Just the way it is. So we took, basically, some folks took that as an excuse not to attend, right? Even when we came back. Well, I'm still not sure. I'm not. Imagine if the threat was there if you went to church that you could be arrested. Think anybody would use that as an excuse to stay home?
Absolutely.
You know, they say, well, I got to provide for my, I mean, you can make a million excuses, and yet somehow these believers were still meeting. They were people just like you and me. They were no different just because they're in the book and they're patriarchs. But there were people in the church that probably used that threat of persecution to stay at home. I'm not, Jonathan, you grabbed the mic, somebody did. Oh, you did. You have something you want?
I was waiting on you to finish your thought.
That could be a while.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
know. I'm very patient. So
Really?
the ones who had received the vision of Paul going to Jerusalem, it even mentions in the 21st chapter the prophet Agabus.
Yes, that, we read that last week.
We had, they had encountered Agabus before, and he had prophesied to them. And all these ones who had a dream or a vision that Paul should not go to Jerusalem, they were doing it out of love for Paul.
Oh, absolutely.
They knew that if he went to Jerusalem, he was going to be imprisoned, and it was going to lead to his death. And Paul did as well. But like Brother Glenn was reading, he had been brought to the point of death so many times before, and the Lord had delivered him for one reason or another to continue. So this was not a new experience for him. He knew what the charge and the call was, and he was determined to see it through to the end. And yet when those other people received the same vision, their response was to look for protection, to look for ways out, to look for an alternative. Don't go to Jerusalem, go to Galilee. Don't go to Jerusalem, go to Macedonia. Go somewhere else and avoid going to Jerusalem, because if you don't go to Jerusalem, you'll save your life. It's human to want to save our life, to want to preserve the life that that is a human natural instinct to thrive and survive. But this is the line between this is the line of dedication. Are you committed to seeing it through to the end? We sing the song, I'll go every step of the way, and I'll never, no, never retreat. And we sing other songs that talk about, I'm going to go no matter what. And, and yet, have we really been faced with that ask, where God asks us, do you really mean this? He does in some ways. He has not asked me like he has asked Paul. And I hope he doesn't. But if he does, I would hope that...
I don't know that my thought is, I don't think he would ask anyone if he knew they weren't willing.
Well, sure.
I think, and I'm just saying that.
Well, Jesus asked the rich young ruler to forsake all that he had, to sell everything that he had, and knew that man's heart. So he does ask us things knowing our heart, because everybody has to know the cost. And you cannot go to heaven without counting the cost and being willing to pay the cost. You may not be asked to pay it, but you have to be willing to pay it. Yeah. And so if it's giving up all of my earthly wealth, if it's losing all of my natural family, if it's forsaking the health of my body, whatever the ask, God is asking when we serve him, are you willing for all these things to leave?
Yeah. We are full of contradictions. And we can't help it. I mean, I'm not saying it's critical. The one you mentioned that's kind of close to my heart right now is the fight that we fight to stay in this life. We say we believe in heaven for believers. Y'all really believe that? When you die, if you're sanctified, that you go to heaven when you die? We say that. We nod. Yes, we believe that. And then a loved one gets near death and their physical body is so worn out, sometimes the mental is gone, and we still fight to keep them here. Wow, that's a contradiction, y'all. It really is. I mean, we're dealing with that with my dad and mom right now, and I'm certainly not faulting my father. He's fighting to keep mom here, and mom has no quality of life. She's not the first one to be in this position. And really, Paul the Apostle said,
To be absent.
To be absent in the body, is to be present with the Lord. And that, good grief, I just had it.
Sorry.
First chapter, Philippians. He said, I have a desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better.
Far better, yeah.
And we believe that, and yet we don't know So sometimes we fight, to stay alive. But to cross to the other side is far better.
I read in
Wow.
Isaiah the other day. I know that's surprising. The chapter where that repeats the story of Hezekiah praying to the Lord about his life, and he got sick and he was at the point of death, and he turned his face to the wall and he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord extended his life 15 years. And I've read that before as when you're in a time of great sorrow and you ask the Lord and he will do it, and you can read it that way. But I was reading somewhere else, and I realized that during that 15-year period, he had Manasseh, his son, who ruled after him. And it says that he was worse than all the other kings before him.
He was a terrible king.
He was even worse in some ways than Ahab. And we talk about Ahab being terrible, but Manasseh was horrible. Now, everything is in the allowance of God. But I thought to myself this week, what if he had let the Lord have his will and not gone against that, not just said, Lord, whatever you want? Who knows what would have happened? I don't like to second guess things that happen in our, but
Yeah.
it makes me stop and think. There is a purpose for everything that God puts in my life. And yes, he wants us to pray and to ask for these things, if it be his will. Well, we got to be careful going against the will of God.
Well, we have to be careful when we tell God what we want.
Right.
Because often when we're telling God what we want, it's in contradiction to what is actually going on.
Yeah.
So we're kind of like Jesus, Lord, if it's possible, let this cup pass. Like, I don't want to do this.
Right.
We do that right in the middle of stuff sometimes. But of course, Jesus gave the qualifier at the end. That's our example. Nevertheless.
Right.
Not my will. But too often, like Hezekiah didn't say,
He didn't say that.
Hezekiah didn't pray that. He just said, I
Preserve my
want
life.
15 years.
Yeah.
Lord, oh, you want it? Okay.
Yeah.
It's kind of like your
Well,
kid will
it's-
say, I want to do
Yeah.
something, and you go, oh, really? You sure you want that?
Well, it says in Psalms that he gave them the desires of their heart, though it brought leanness into
Yeah.
their soul.
Well, we are filled with contradictions. One that came to me this week, and I don't mean this to be irreverent at all, but man, it slapped me in the face. I love this because I was raised with it in Norfolk. No law but love.
No creed but Christ.
No creed. What is a creed?
A doctrine.
It's a doctrine.
Right.
No creed but Christ.
No law but love.
No guide but the Bible. Where did that come from? I don't know the answer.
I don't know the
So it's
answer.
not a trick question. I'm going to Google it because I don't know that it was original to us.
I don't think it was.
Probably not as my guess. I've never thought about this till this week, and now I'm like a dog on a hunt. I want to find out. One reason I suspicion that it's not original to us was my great shock about 12 years ago when I met a man. He's a friend of mine, Lee Smith. He's pastor of Leesburg United Methodist Church. He's a great guy. Lee's father was a pastor in what they call CCCU, Church of Christ in Central Union. I had never heard of that denomination. Well, it's holiness. And I Googled it 12 years ago, roughly, and on their website, I got to reading about order of service for the dead, funerals. And their committal to the ground was the word for word what was in our discipline. I was shocked. oh, it was original to us. No, we had borrowed it. I don't know if it came from Adam Clark or somebody like that. But I thought about the phrase, no law but love. Really? Really? No, not really. Because that pretty much means, the way I take it, maybe I'm wrong, but if you take that at face value, it would be like, you just come in and we're just going to love you. No, we got a lot of laws and to-dos and not-to-dos. We got more laws than just love. Let's be honest about it. Now, no creed but Christ, yeah, I'll go with that. No God but the Bible, yeah, I'll go with that. We're good on those two. But no law but love, nah, I don't mean that to be irreverent, y'all. I really don't. But it was kind of a shock when I thought about it this week. I went, I've been just quoting it, all my life, like, oh yeah.
Well, it's good to examine yourselves.
Huh?
It's good to examine ourselves.
And I say that because of that. I
Right.
believe in being transparent and honest.
Right.
And, when you get into traditions, especially, we've talked about this before, tradition just happens often because it's something you've done for a long time.
Right.
You may have started it just because it was convenient, not because it was biblical, not because it was just something you did, and then you did it the next year, and the next year, and all of a sudden, oh, that's our tradition. And we get all religious about it when maybe it just kind of happened, started by accident.
If someone came in and said it was illegal for us to sing a cappella, and we had to bring musical instruments, that is a tradition. That is our musical tradition. That is our worship tradition, I guess that is a better phrase. But if someone were to come in and mandate that we had to baptize in water, that's a doctrinal issue. Those are two different things.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
And I would have a harder time adjusting to baptism than I would musical instruments.
Yeah.
If going back to what you were saying about these Jews, they were hung up on things that were tradition, but yet they were also things that had been in the law.
Well, they were doctrinal.
They were doctrinal.
Yes, they were.
And so it was more than tradition to them. They were God's people. They were told, and I'm talking about the ones who were sincere. I'm not talking about Pharisees and all, that was messing up their way of life. The ones who were believers in the law and in what God had ordained in the scriptures, they were following the scriptures. And now you're going to tell me I don't have to do that? I don't have to be circumcised anymore? It was more than a tradition. It was doctrine. It was belief. And that's hard. But faith is so big that it allows us to overcome and to believe to the saving of the soul. And faith here, what Paul is talking about, that same faith that allowed him to overcome his teaching and his raising, that same faith is now what's able to let him see to the end and say, it's worth it. It's worth dying for. It's worth giving my life over.
Well,
Do we believe that?
It's interesting who the Lord calls too, because, he called the most zealous anti-Christian that there was in Paul the Apostle. No one, he said here, Sister Faye read in the 4th verse, he says, I persecuted this way unto the death. Mm-hmm. He probably had a little part of him that went, yes, when he found out they killed, not that they arrested him, not that they put him in prison, but when they killed him, there was probably a little part of him that did my job, yes. Okay, and this he said in the 5th verse, as the high priest also bears me witness. They gave Paul, he had letters in his hand. Paul didn't have the authority to arrest people or to commit them to prison or to kill them. But the council did, and the high priest was the head of the council. So he said, as all the estate of the elders, the word estate there means the group, the collection, the whatever phrase you want to, I think my reference says the council. In my Bible calls it the council of elders. But the group that was in charge, they were the ones that gave the authority. But here's Paul, the most anti-Christian zeal person. And God says, I want that man.
He saw his
He
heart.
could take somebody from an old grunge band and say, I want that man, right? I don't know if I'm using the right term on the kind of band, but somebody that was in a lifestyle that was anti-Christian, really, and sold out and say, I want that man. I want him for me, because if he's that sold out over here, he's going to be that sold out when he comes to me.
Right.
Isn't that beautiful? It really is beautiful. And that becomes a man that's going to stand. I got chills talking about it. That's somebody that's not going to waver, not going to be, oh, they hurt my feelings, so I'll give up. Forget that. This is what we do. This is who we are. This is what we do. All right, we got just a couple of minutes. Sister Carolyn, you're next. If you'll pick up reading in verse 6. And we're going to read down, oh my goodness, it's hard to find a stopping point. Read down through the 10th verse. Maybe that'd be a good place to stop.
And it came to pass that as I made my journey and was come nigh unto Damascus about noon, suddenly there shone from heaven a great light around about me. And I fell to the unto the ground, and heard a voice saying unto me, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And I answered, Who art thou, Lord? And he said unto me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom thou persecutest. And they that were with me saw indeed the light, and were afraid, but they heard not the voice of him that spake to me. And I said, What shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said unto him, Arise, and go into Damascus, and there it shall be told thee all things which are appointed for thee to do.
There's his experience. God struck him down. God said, enough. And he recognized in the depths of that moment, in the heightened intensity of that moment, there was somebody greater than him. Who art thou, Lord? Calls him Lord. And so, we all have a different experience on how we come to God. I don't have that blinding light moment in my lifetime, but some people do. I thank the Lord for that. Brother Thomas Muston had one that he shared often, and it was very intense. And I loved hearing his testimony. And there are others. Brother Robert Williams has had that testimony. And where he about knows where he was on the street, riding down the street when the Lord called him. Uncle Joseph Clellan. I'm thinking of people that, these three that I'm just mentioning, I could think of others if I keep going. Their experience was, the common thread in their experience was that they, when God called them, they cleaned up before they came to church and went to the altar.
Right.
They threw out cigarettes. They threw out girly magazines. They took things that they knew were offensive, that weren't right, that were sinful, that God had convicted them of, and they junked that stuff before they came to the altar.
First be a falling away first.
There must, yes, and it's not always that case. I used to think that distinctly, but there are also experiences of people that were doing all of those things right, and I'm thinking of some specific names, I'm just not going to go into it, right to the moment they stepped in the church. There was no falling away. I'm just saying that in grace, that's not always the case.
Right.
And in church, God zapped them, called them, and they left church and cleaned up. There wasn't a falling away before they got there. So God deals with all of us with our situations. I think they're letting out a class. We're going to go ahead and stop right here, and we'll pick up next Sunday through the webcast. We'll be back in a few minutes.